I was working sort of 100 hours a week, and I ended up with just 6% of the company and a very small salary. And quite a lot of people made money, and I made nothing at all, really. So, that was one of my first learnings about being an inventor and, ending up with very little, because that's how it goes. And I'm determined not to make the same mistake this time. But, it was disheartening.
Welcome to the Invention Stories podcast, where we share stories of inventors who turn their idea into a product. Please visit our website at www.inventionstories.com. And now, from the Invention Stories podcast World Headquarters Studios in Morro Bay, California, is our host, Robert Baer.
Welcome to the Invention Stories podcast. I am your host, Robert Baer, and thank you for listening. This is episode 22, Jeff Woolf and his invention, the Morpher Helmet. This episode is the first in a 3-part series. The Invention Stories podcast is brought to you by the Socket Saver. Do you have loose wall sockets in your house? The Socket Saver is an easy, safe, and effective solution. More information can be found at www.socketsaver.com. Jeff Woolf has invented the Morpher Helmet, and Time Magazine has designated it one of the top 25 inventions of 2016. As the survivor of a major bicycle crash, Jeff Woolf spent considerable time doing market research. He learned that 92% of all bicycle scheme cyclists he interviewed say they don't wear a helmet, and 82% of them said the reason why they don't wear the helmet is the lack of portability. Jeff Woolf has spent more than 5 years creating a better and more convenient helmet. It folds flat so that it's incredibly easy to carry around. We've got Jeff Woolf on the line, so let's get started. Welcome, Jeff, to the Invention Stories podcast. It's great to have you with us. I want to start off at the beginning. You were born in Edgware, Middlesex, England. Is that like part of the outskirts of London?
Yeah, when I was born, it was not in London. It was in Hertfordshire. But when I was about 10, it became part of London. Yeah, so it's just on the outskirts. It's a bit like, I guess, I don't know, somewhere on the island to Manhattan. I mean, it's very close to central London.
So when you were a little kid, you could just get on your bike and ride into London and go wherever you wanted?
Yeah, I could do.
Okay, so I learned that you have 2 sisters, and your mom and your grandfather were both inventors. It sounds like it's part of your in your blood to create. Is that something that was important to you as a child?
But in calling my grandfather and mother inventors, that wasn't their kind of raison d'etre or their main thing. It's just they did happen to have, both of them had quite good inventions, but they wouldn't have called themselves inventors by any means.
All right, so you have so much of a great background, and I could spend hours talking to you, but I value your time, and I just want to sort of get to it. You went to school, and it looked like you were really into holography. When you were in school, did that just appeal to you? And
yeah, basically, I mean, my loves at school were physics, chemistry. Photography was a real love of mine always. And I went to an exhibition in London and saw these holograms for the first time. They were done by the Russians. They were really, it's such a new technology. And I just fell in love with it because it encompassed everything. It encompassed photography, physics, and a lot of chemistry in the films and the processing. So it all sort of worked for me. But I decided I wanted to study it at university. But there were no courses. There just weren't courses anywhere in the world. I tried everywhere. And so I thought, to hell with it. I'm just going to do it myself. And that's what I did. I started making holograms.
Wow.
And that was really my first, well, if you like, job. I thought I'd be a millionaire in a year. Little did I realize the world didn't work that way. But I had an amazing time sort of working with, I found that lasers were very rare then. I found one laser in Brighton Hospital, and I used to borrow that to make holograms. I was trying to find a way to make 3D X-rays using holograms. And so Brighton were helping me with that. And then, what else was it? Oh, I found another laser that I was able to use up a little bit north of London. So I was sort of traveling around using these lasers where I could and trying to make holograms. It was an interesting time, but it didn't really lead to very much.
I'm always surprised something like holograms aren't like huge today, especially for advertising. And I keep thinking it's right around the corner. say you're trying to show somebody at a Costco, and instead of actually bringing a hot tub to sell the hot tub and show it, why not have a cool hologram of a hot tub? I mean, it seems like people would just be drawn to it, and then it wouldn't be so heavy and things like that. Are you surprised at holograms, or do you expect them just to be taken over in the next few years?
Yeah, no, I think that what seems to be happening is there are so many amazing advances now in 3D projection technology, or 3D technology just using screens. I'm not sure if holograms are ever going to reach the potential they had in that. I mean, what happened was with holograms, it sort of went down the security route where people started using them to secure banknotes and credit cards in particular. They actually weren't that secure, but they're still being used. And I think that, I don't know, for some reason it didn't happen, because one of my visions, if you like, with holograms that I thought could happen was, I thought, my God, if you've got an office, say you've got an office or a boardroom or something in the middle of a block without a window, you could actually have a whole garden or something, you know, whatever. You could have a fantastic image on one of the walls that would project. I mean, it's all a bit pie in the sky now. It never happened. And, you know, years before we had good screens or anything like that. So, because this was a lot of years ago. But I totally agree with you. You know, when you say hot tub or any number of other things, holograms would have been a really great way to have shown them and to carry, you know, to have carried things around without having heavy things to carry around. Not just as a piece of art of something that was 3D, but yeah, absolutely. For advertising, for salespeople, for all sorts. It never really took off in the right way.
I guess we'll have to see. I could speak with you about this all day long, but I'd like to... Yeah, I wanted to ask you about micromap. That sounded really cool from the description. Was that one of your first inventions? Were you totally in control of that?
Well, it was one of the first that I actually got into production. In fact, it was the first that I really got. Basically, I was skiing and I was stuck up a mountain sitting in a restaurant looking out. And I noticed that people were getting off of a cable car outside this restaurant. I could see, you know, that it was still blizzardy. And they were kind of planting their poles in the snow and taking their gloves off and opening up maps. And that's when it occurred to me that maps are really, you know, they're much more beautiful used indoors on a table or something, but they're useless when it's windy and rainy. And so that's where the kind of spark came from. I thought I've got to make them smaller, but how do I do that? And credit cards, of course, were popular then as they are now. Everyone had a credit card, so I thought that's the ideal format. But then it was a case of how do I re-enlarge them? And so it took a bit of developing. And funnily enough, I used a lot of my holographic knowledge to manage to print at incredibly high resolutions of about 6 million dots a square inch in those days onto credit cards. It was incredibly high resolution. And then I also used some of my knowledge of lasers to design a lens that we could mold. And we basically had a little molded viewer the size of a cigarette packet that re-enlarged all of these maps. So it allowed people to carry a whole load of mapping just in their pocket. And that did quite well in one way. It did well in the fact that I did deals with people like Ordnance Survey, who are the equivalent of USGS, who I also did a deal with, US Geological Survey, and people like Michelin in France, another equivalent sort of national mapping body, and people like the AA in England, who are the Automobile Association. And basically, and I was selling these things everywhere. So, I mean, the Hammaker Schlammer in New York was selling them. And then we had an Eddie Bauer version we made that was selling all over the States. And it went quite well on that front. But on a personal front, I was working sort of 100 hours a week, and I ended up with just 6% of the company and a very small salary. And quite a lot of people made money, and I made nothing at all, really. So, you know, that was one of my first learnings about being an inventor and, you know, ending up with very little, because that's how it goes. And I'm determined not to make the same mistake this time. But, you know, it was disheartening.
And now it's time for a commercial break. As I mentioned earlier in the Invention Stories podcast, we are now sponsored by Socket Saver. The Socket Saver is an easy, safe, and effective solution. No repairs necessary, no circuit breakers involved, no electrical knowledge or mechanical skills required. Socket savers are inexpensive, efficient, and portable. For more information, please visit www.socketsaver.com. www.socketsaver.com. You worked for the government in innovation, and you used to help people write their business plans. And I think that's really smart. Anytime I hear of somebody doing a business plan, I tend to give them a little bit better chance of being successful because they've really thought of more things out completely and put it to paper.
Yeah.
What exactly did you used to do?
Well, shall I tell you the background to how that came about quickly?
That'd be great.
I don't want to take up too much of your time, but it's kind of important. When Micromap eventually, when I was sort of booted out of it by someone, and I bumped into a guy who had wanted to invest in Micromap years before. He said, "How are you? What's happening? How's Micromap?" And I said, "Well, I sold it. I didn't get very much because I didn't." And he said, "I really liked the way you turned me down." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, when I wanted to invest and you said no, you wrote me a really nice letter explaining why." And I said, "Oh, that's really nice of you to say, Peter." And he said, "Look, how about jumping onto the other side of the table now?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, why don't you run my fund for me?" So I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I'm a wealthy man." I knew he was that. And he had a $300 million fund. And he asked me just to basically be the guy on his side of the table that looked at any ventures that came to him for money to invest in them. So I was suddenly on the other side of the fence, and it was very, very fascinating to me. Because what I noticed was a couple of things. I noticed that, firstly, sometimes I'd go to these sort of small innovation companies presenting to a lot of high net worth individuals all at once. They do a presentation, a bit like Shark Tank, if you like. And what I noticed was that sometimes I'd look at the thing and I think, no, it's useless. It doesn't work. There's nothing here. But if one of the people invested, then everyone suddenly wanted to invest. It was a bit like, the emperor's new clothes. And I thought that was interesting, but much more interesting, I found that a lot of inventors, and I had this when I was an inventor, you go to a venture capitalist and they say, "Okay, where's your business plan?" And you go, "Oh, well, I'm not very good at business plans." They go, "Well, go away and write one and then come back." Now, what I noticed was that, what I thought was that inventors basically are good at inventing. It might be some bloke that's worked on a production line for 30 years, has no idea about business, but knows definitely the best way to, to get breath savers into a roll. He might find a better way of doing it that's going to save the company money. Or he might find a way of doing something differently, but he can't write a business plan. So what I set about doing with the fund I was running for this guy, Peter, was I would go and find people and help them to write the business plan. And then we sometimes invested in them and sometimes it worked out. So when basically this guy I was working for, Peter, he stopped investing eventually. He made a very big investment himself and lost a lot of money. And it was at the time that, the markets weren't very good. Early 2000, and that's when I started working for Business Link for the government. And at that stage, I was seeing hundreds of inventors a year, maybe even thousands, but advising them on how to write business plans, how to get money, what to do, what not to do, how to get production in. I'm quite well rounded. I've done so many things now. So that's really how that all started. And I loved it. I love it, actually. And so, does that answer your question or not?
That gives me great understanding. Most inventors that I've talked to, they don't see it from the other side, or there's part of their... They need to be well-rounded. A lot of them are just engineers. Yeah. And somebody needs to be a salesman. I mean, there's a lot of inventors who are frightened to make a sale or get discouraged with the first time.
Completely. I mean, it's very scary to go out there with your own product, and which you might have belief in, and to actually hope that other people do. And, it's lonely and it's hard. And I think that the well-rounded nature is very true. If you're going to be a successful inventor, you've got to have a lot of different skills that you can draw from. And there's not many I find that have that. But that doesn't mean that they don't have a fabulous idea and it can't be exploited, because it can be, and it can't be developed, because sometimes it should be developed regardless of that. But you've got to be able to understand production, manufacturing, fundraising, running a company, making sales, marketing. I mean, there are just so many areas that, a successful inventor has to be able to act in jack of all trades, even if they're not the master of it. So that's few and far between.
Right. And if you don't have that, then you have to look for something, either develop those skills or find that in someone else and be a partner with them. And then you have the issues of partners where You don't always have two people on the same page pulling in the same directions, and it's a challenge.
I mean, partnerships can be the best thing in the world, but not necessarily, they can also be the worst thing in the world. And the other thing I find in common with most inventors, and I was like this myself, is that they're paranoid as hell that someone's going to rip their idea off. They're paranoid as hell that someone's going to rip them off. So they don't share. They're never willing to give away a share of their company. They don't want people involved in their company or idea. And I think that's short-sighted. And, you can do it the way I did it with Micromap, whereby you end up with nothing at all because you give away too much at the beginning, because that's the nature of how things work. Or you can give nothing at all away and the result's the same. You've got to find a balance where you can give something away to encourage someone to join you. You've got to develop the trust. But, there's a lot of other things I've learned that fly contrary to what most people would say when it comes to innovation. A lot of people say, for instance, if you go to a website or pick up a book on funding inventions, most people say, go to your family and your friends first. That's the easiest form of money. And actually, I would say you should never, ever do that. And the reason is, it is an easy form of money compared to going to a bank or a venture capitalist. But what happens is, it causes a lot of family problems when things don't go well. And as I discovered to my horror in Micromap, I had an uncle who put 50,000 in, another uncle who put 10,000 in. And it was really because of them that I kept working this 100 hours a week. I worked myself till I was half dead because I didn't want them to lose their money because I felt so guilty about it. Now, if I'd have had investors like banks, I would have been able to walk away much earlier. I would have been able to say, look, this isn't working. I can't do this anymore. I'm walking away. But because I didn't want all of the problems associated with my family losing money, I didn't. So I would always recommend people actually don't borrow from your family, because it's only going to cause you problems, them problems, the relationship problems, and so on. Unless you've got an extremely wealthy family, obviously that's different. So sorry, that's just a little bit of an aside for you.
No, that's what we love. And the thing about Micromap is, everybody uses phones for their mapping and GPS. And I remember when I was a kid, maps were being sold, probably tons of them, usually at the gas stations. And,
yeah, that's right.
And now you won't even find one at a gas station.
No, you won't find a map anymore unless you go to a specialist shop, I shouldn't think. There's not really. I mean, yeah, I've got a 17, nearly 18-year-old daughter. She wouldn't know where to start with a map. She'd look at it, she'd go, what the hell is this,
You fold it? Yeah, we know they couldn't fold them back together, but no, a lot of inventions that I see, sometimes I see somebody's working on something and I keep thinking, at the rate we're going, this thing's going to be obsolete before they're able to bring it to market. I like it that the Morpher Helmet isn't one of them. It seemed like you try to figure out what is the perfect helmet, the best that it could possibly be, and then you created that. I know it started from an accident, and that must have been pretty frightening. Let me ask you before that, though, did you always wear a helmet when you rode a bicycle?
No, I don't think I did. And I think no, absolutely not. I mean, I'm a mad risk-taking idiot most of the time, so it's just a surprise. I think I'm not sure why I was wearing a helmet, but maybe I sometimes did, obviously. And on that particular day, on that particular journey, thank God I was, because there is no doubt it saved my life, no doubt whatsoever. And in fact, the guy that hit me, this is another long story and I'll keep it short, but the guy that hit me, there was a kind of road rage incident going on. Oh, they talked about that, didn't they, on the video you saw, because they do that.
I just said that there were two cars that were racing, and
they were, and they raced past me, and it was only a single carriage road. It was only a short road. A narrow road, and my pedal got caught up somehow in the fender or the wheel arch, something of the car as it passed me, and it pulled the bike forwards fast, and I got thrown off the bike and went into the curb. Anyway, the guy drove off. It was a hit and run. But as he drove off, I kept repeating. I saw his number as he drove off, and I kept repeating it and repeating it. And then someone wrote it down from me repeating it, and then I sort of passed out. Anyway, next thing I know is they did have a copy of the number because of that. And after about a year and a half, the police eventually traced the guy, and it all went to court. And after all the evidence is given and the jury had made the judgment, the judge can then read out previous convictions. They don't read them out at first because everyone's innocent till proven guilty or something. I don't know. Anyway, when they read out the previous convictions, he was already on probation for a hit and run when he did the hit and run with me. So the guy went to jail for 18 months. But anyway, I forgot all about that. Honestly, it was never on my mind. Maybe somewhere deeply in the back of my psyche it was there, because maybe that's why I noticed that people weren't using bikes when the Boris bikes, when the bike share first came to London. Maybe that's why. But something in there, made me think, why the hell is no one wearing a helmet? Just makes no sense. And that's sort of how it all started.
Did your bike get pretty trashed, or did you just use the bike the next time you wanted to use a bike? I know that you were injured and your bones, when they healed and you wanted to go ride, did you use the same bike, and were you nervous to use it? Or
I think I've never been as comfortable on bikes since that time. I didn't really ride much after that. My wheel and forks were smashed up, but it was a really good bike, so I did have them replaced. Or it was quite a good bike. So I had them replaced, and I used it a few times. I was never really comfortable driving in London after that. Not really. I think it just left a bad taste in my mouth. And in fact, I'm about to, for the first time since then, I'm about to do a big, I'm dreading it, honestly. In a month, I'm supposed to be doing a big charity cycle ride in Israel, which I've donated silver helmets to all of the riders on this ride for a fantastic charity called Norwood that looks after special needs and disabled children and adults all around the London area. And I'm kind of doing this ride to raise money for them. Well, first I heard they were doing their 25th anniversary ride with 250 riders. So I thought it would be really nice to give them 250 silver helmets as it's their silver anniversary. And they loved the idea. But when I went to see them, they talked me into doing it. And honestly, I'm dreading it so much, Robert, because I'm so much not a cyclist anymore. Anyway, I'm going to do it. It's the Dead Sea to the Red Sea in Israel. And I must be flipping mad.
Well, maybe it'll be a good thing. When you're riding a bicycle, you're very limited because you can't really move. You're almost like a target or something, a sitting duck.
Yes, completely. And when the bike falls and you're still attached to it or you're thrown from it, you don't really have much choice of the way your body lands, do you? You can't say, I'm going to stop my head hitting the pavement. I'm going to stop, Anyway.
I'm glad that you were wearing a helmet.
Well, you're very kind. So am I. So is my mum. Yeah.
You've been listening to episode 22 of the Invention Stories podcast, Jeff Woolf and the Morpher Helmet Part 1. I want to thank Jeff for being our guest today. More information can be found at www.morpherhelmet.com. The Invention Stories podcast has been sponsored by The Socket Saver. Does the plug fall out of your wall socket while vacuuming, drying your hair, using a power tool, or recharging your electronic devices? The Socket Saver is an easy, safe, and effective solution. Please visit www.socketsaver.com. If you're an inventor who would like to be featured on the Invention Stories podcast, have a suggestion on how we can make this podcast better, or would like to become a sponsor, please contact us at inventionstoriespodcast@gmail.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we invite you to write a positive review for us on iTunes. An easy way to get there is to go to www.inventionstories.com/review. More information and show notes can be found at our website, www.inventionstories.com. Thank you very much for listening today, and please tell a friend.